June 25, 1876. George Custer thought this would be his greatest victory. Instead, it became the U.S. Army's bloodiest defeat. Because what he didn't know? 2,000 warriors were waiting. And they weren't just fighting for land, they were fighting for survival. Today, we reveal the real story behind Little Bighorn, the lies, the betrayal, and the shocking last moments of Custer's men left to rot under the Montana sun. This isn't the story you learned in school. This is the truth. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why the Lakota say the earth drank their blood. But before we begin, make sure to like and subscribe to our channel to help support our community. The Battle of Little Bighorn was not merely a violent confrontation. It was a stark mirror of an era's convictions about sacrifice, glory, and the reverence given to the fallen. The corpses left behind, abandoned to nature under the rule of the victors, tell a tale of courage, treachery, and the unstoppable tide of ambition that defined the American Indian Wars. For more than 200 years, the frontier was a battleground where indigenous nations clashed with the relentless advance of American expansion. The Plains Indians, tribes such as the Apache, Comanche, Cheyenne, and Lakota, stood as formidable barriers to the United States' vision of westward destiny. These were warriors of extraordinary skill. Famed for their brutality and peerless mastery of horseback combat, they moved like phantoms across the open plains, their raiding parties small yet lethal. Equipped with bows, war clubs, and a scarce supply of guns, they sowed fear among unprepared settlers and tested even the most battle-hardened U.S. troops. Their unbreakable spirit and fierce autonomy made them a power the American military could neither subdue nor dismiss. Their survival alone was an act of defiance against the surge of encroachment. In 1851, the U.S. government attempted to impose structure upon the turmoil through the Fort Laramie Treaty. This pact was designed to halt the vicious intertribal conflicts that threatened white settlers and destabilized profitable trade networks. It also sought to safeguard American ambitions by assigning distinct territories to 8 native nations, affirming their lands as sovereign and beyond U.S. jurisdiction. The treaty guaranteed undisturbed travel for settlers along the Oregon Trail and permitted the building of roads and army posts. On paper, it shone as a promise of peace. In practice, it was a shaky ceasefire destined to collapse under old hatreds and fresh avarice. Tribes locked in age-old feuds kept fighting over shrinking bison populations, their violations sparking new waves of bloodshed. Then came the Gold Strike in the Black Hills, a game-changer. Like a magnet, it pulled hordes of prospectors into tribal territories, brazenly defying the treaty's terms. Towns sprang up overnight, and the U.S. government, sworn to uphold the agreement, looked the other way. This treachery stoked a slow-burning fury among the tribes as they watched invaders defile their holy ground. By 1866, tensions erupted into Red Cloud's War, a bloody 2-year struggle that took 200 American soldiers and settlers' lives, and countless native ones. The conflict ended with the 1868 Second Fort Laramie Treaty, but the calm was as fleeting as a prairie gust. Prospectors barred from the reservation poured in anyway, and the Army's token efforts to block them were drowned by the flood of newcomers. The Black Hills, a land of deep sacred meaning and natural riches, became America's obsession. Packed with gold and timber, it tempted a government hungry to strip its wealth. One U.S. officer bluntly admitted the hills were the only part of value to the Lakota. Officials strong-armed the tribe to surrender their claims, dangling hollow pledges while plotting to run the Northern Pacific Railroad straight through the last untouched hunting lands. When diplomacy broke down, brutality took over. Ruthless raids on native camps slaughtered women and children alike. Years of betrayal had frayed the Lakota's endurance to its limit. Then rose 2 legendary leaders, Sitting Bull, the visionary tactician, and Crazy Horse, the warrior whose name alone chilled American spines. both Lakota, they rallied their people for a final defiant fight against extinction. Tribes like the Sioux and Cheyenne, once hesitant to take up arms, now united behind their leaders, convinced that American pledges held no more value than wind-scattered ashes. By June 1876, their determination would face its ultimate trial in a clash that would reverberate across the continent. On June 22nd, Custer and his 7th Cavalry, serving as advance scouts for a larger military column, ventured into the Broken Badlands. A Civil War icon celebrated for his boldness, Custer's flaxen hair and reckless courage had become the stuff of legend. At dawn on June 25th, his lookouts spied an enormous indigenous village 14 miles east of Little Bighorn River, its teepees blanketing the valley like a field of pale mushrooms. Custer intended to strike at first light the following day, but destiny had other plans. When scouts warned that warriors had spotted their tracks, Custer, fearing he'd lost the advantage, made his disastrous choice: attack without delay. Thus began the Battle of Little Bighorn. Splitting his 700 troops into 3 detachments, Custer sent one to cut off southern retreat routes, another to assault the camp directly, while he led the 3rd group in a northern flanking maneuver. As noon approached, the valley echoed with cavalry charges, sunlight flashing off drawn sabers. While Sitting Bull organized defenses for the vulnerable, Crazy Horse led the counterattack with hurricane force. American scouts had catastrophically underestimated their opposition, reporting 800 braves when over 2,000 warriors, many wielding superior repeating rifles, stood ready to face the Army's outdated single-shot weapons. Custer's 210 soldiers found themselves swallowed by a tempest of lead and arrowheads. Isolated and overwhelmed, their dark blue coats formed grim islands in the swaying prairie grass. The furious combat lasted barely 60 minutes. The struggle reached its terrible climax on the knoll now known as Last Stand Hill, where Custer's doomed command made their last hopeless resistance. When silence finally fell, every soldier lay dead. The full truth of Custer's final moments perished with him, buried forever in battle's confusion. Indigenous oral histories provide fractured insights into the battle, like shards of broken glass. Ashish Shisha, Custer's Crow Scout, recounted a foolhardy assault met with crushing resistance, forcing the troops into retreat toward Last Stand Hill before being completely overwhelmed. Other U.S. forces, oblivious to the catastrophe, discovered the truth 48 hours later. Arriving at the killing ground, they encountered utter desolation. The victorious warriors had disappeared, carrying away their fallen. Only the 210 slain soldiers remained, littered across gore-soaked terrain. Captain Frederick Benteen, commander of the 3rd Battalion, studied the slaughter with grim resignation. He described it as a complete breakdown of discipline, men releasing their mounts in terror, officers screaming unheard orders, chaos reigning absolute. The corpses had been methodically stripped of uniforms, arms, and honor. Following spiritual customs, warriors had disfigured the bodies, fingers amputated to disarm them in the afterlife. Custer's remains showed particular signs of wrath, ears pierced with awls for his deafness to counsel, his groin mutilated with a spearhead to sterilize his memory. The living soldiers now faced the ghastly work of interment. With inadequate implements, they scraped out shallow resting places, mere dust coverings for most. Custer's 18-inch trench, staked and labeled with his name in an empty bullet casing, passed for proper burial. A chest gunshot likely ended his life, while a scalp wound indicated ceremonial defilement after death. America staggered from the blow. The Civil War idol became a fallen saint overnight. Public fury demanded dignified repatriation of remains. Lieutenant General Sheridan's urgent dispatch to Sherman captured the mood. The bereaved families of Custer's officers implore me to return their loved ones. Can the War Department afford this expense? The sum required is trifling. The appeal was first rejected, but Sherman and Sheridan's dogged efforts prevailed. By July 1877, Troops revisited the site, their spirits crumbling at the grim spectacle. The corpses, now rotted and ravaged by scavengers, were scarcely identifiable. Officers' remains were carefully separated, boxed in pine caskets, and shipped to the nearest garrison for proper burial. Common soldiers, too many to move, were interred where they perished, their resting places denoted by wooden markers. Sheridan considered the mission accomplished until Montana's deluges arrived. Torrential rains scoured the thin topsoil, leaving the dead vulnerable once more. John Fouch's subsequent photograph laid bare the horror. Skeletal fragments scattered like broken twigs, mute evidence of the battle's brutality. For the Lakota and Cheyenne, Little Bighorn stood as a Pyrrhic victory, a brief blaze of resistance against an inevitable tide. They understood their struggle continued. Meanwhile, white America, electrified by Custer's demise, clamored for vengeance. The fallen colonel, mythologized as a paragon of bravery, became a martyr's banner. A crushing military response followed. U.S. forces overran tribal territories, decimating hunting grounds. Within 12 months, most warriors capitulated, their resistance eroded by unrelenting campaigns. The Black Hills, the very land soaked in blood, were confiscated without payment. Prospectors overran the region, their stagecoaches groaning with gold, while the displaced nations retained only the ghosts of a stolen homeland. Custer's last stand wasn't just a battle. It was a reckoning. The Lakota and Cheyenne won the day, but the war? That was already lost. Because within a year, the U.S. Army would hunt down every warrior who fought here. The Black Hills were stolen, the buffaloes slaughtered, and the victors of Little Bighorn? They were erased. So tell me, does a victory even matter if no one lets you remember it? Drop your answer below, and while you debate, hit like. This story deserves to be heard.